You can see the tattoo.
We're going to gavel in.
Okay.
Sorry. Just really hit me.
We're starting just a minute or so late because we had a reception for a number of retirees with over about 500 years of service, Kevin
Be
said.
close. Yep.
And so just wonderful staff, and they've been great mentors to the people replacing them. I was talking to Dave Smith, who coached track and cross country, and the current coaching staff is all Dave's lineage. It's really neat to see that.
Yeah.
So it was a wonderful event. That's why we're starting a couple minutes late. I should also let you know Dan Grabowski may be coming a little late. He had to rescue his son whose vehicle went kaput on the highway somewhere around Lansing. And so he may show up a little bit late, but we will get started. So we'll start with the superintendent's report. Keenan.
Well, thank you, Dave. I'd like to welcome everyone here tonight in the audience and to those watching the live stream this evening. I'd like to just take a minute to thank all of our wonderful VCS retirees and all the years of service to the students and families over decades here in VCS. Of course, we want to wish those retirees all the best, and when they want to come back and do some stuff for us, we're right here waiting for them. So congratulations to the retirement class of 2025. Also like to take a minute, obviously Friday was our last day of school. I'd like to take a minute to thank our hardworking and dedicated VCS staff for making the 24-25 school year so successful. They're amazing people. We are so fortunate to have so many talented individuals helping to shape the future of our precious students. I hope everyone has a great summer break with plenty of relaxation and family time. And also, I'd also like to just extend my thank yous to our families for all the support they give us every single year. It was remarkable this year as well. Pretty short report tonight. Just wanted to, I think everybody knows Lansing is extremely quiet. They were up in Mackinac trying to iron out a budget. They're back. The committee should be working on that. We're all anxiously awaiting news about the budget. And Steve's going to give I'm looking forward to our annual public hearing, but he'll definitely have to explain all the assumptions just due to the lack of information regarding the budget that we're working with at this time. Also, we have been extremely busy hiring new staff, and I'm really happy to report that is going well. We have a couple positions that we still need to fill, but knock on wood, I feel like we are filling positions faster than we normally have in the past. And it's good to see the pipeline starting to grow because we were struggling to find people. So that's going much better, so I'm very excited about that. Important dates, there's really not much in there. We have started summer school. High school will officially kick off tomorrow. Started today, I believe, but will officially kick off tomorrow. All our 8th graders are currently at Cedar Point. So we're going to have I think Adam mentioned about 35 to 40 students that will be involved with that program. And then we'll kick off elementary summer school here in a couple weeks, or next Monday, I believe. So we're looking forward to having a place for our kids to be this summer. In your red folders, we have put the tentative dates for board meetings for the 25-26 school year. And I just wanted you to take a look at that. If you have any questions regarding any of these, can you please reach out to Tamara? It'll be on the agenda in July during a major part of our organizational time to lock those in. And just real briefly, I'd like to go back to the May board meeting just for a minute. We had some concerns about some library books. And I've been working with our school librarians, and I put together a statement that I'd just like to read real quick. Library materials are selected and purchased based on a variety of criteria. District librarians follow School Board Policy 2521, selection of instructional materials and equipment. As stated in the policy, librarians consider curriculum, budget, student interest, ability, reading level, and maturity level. Purchases reflect the community in which we live with a variety of materials. Professional book reviews such as School Library Journal, Book List, Horn Book Magazine, and Kirkus are consulted when considering items for purchase. This procedure and policy has been consistently followed for multiple decades here in Vicksburg. If families are concerned about their children's access to a book, they may first contact the building principal with their concerns. If meeting with the principal does not allay the concern, they may then file a formal challenge following School Board Policy 9130, Public Complaints and Grievances, and filling out corresponding Form 9130F2, Request for Review of Materials or Course Content. The challenge policy is in place for the benefit of all our students and families. Families hold varying beliefs, and if a parent asks for a book to be pulled from the shelf that aligns with any given belief, the district cannot remove the material unless and until it follows the challenge procedure in place and the challenge committee reaches a decision. Library materials are not required reading, they are free choice reading. The library catalogs are found on each school's website on the Library Media Center tab. Parents and guardians that wish to restrict access to library materials for their own children may contact the librarian of their school's choice to request that students have no access at all to library materials or to restrict access to specific materials. This information is entered into the circulation system and will alert the staff member of the restrictions on the student account. So I wanted to make sure that everybody's aware of how those books are chosen and then the proper procedures through policy that we would follow for challenges. So thank you for that. And, hold on, sorry, Dave. And that's my report.
Okay, very good.
Yep.
Mr. Brush, you're going to talk about Stratford, I understand.
Yes, I have an email right here from Ms. Sparks. And so this is a trip they take every year. It's June 27th through June 29th. It's the Stratford Festival in Ontario, Canada. And so there's tons of different work sessions that all the kids can go to. I think this is all in your board packet. 18 students are currently going on this trip, and they're all part of the International Thespian Society at Vicksburg High School. There are plenty of chaperones. It's actually, and then teachers that are going as well. I believe everything is being paid for by the students. Questions?
And I believe we've done this trip before.
Yes.
We've done this trip a long time ago. So I went with my son. 1 year it was great. But what I have a question about the workshops. How does that, are they at the theater where the performances are put on, or what? How do they organize those?
That is a great question. I see all of the pieces. Oh, yes, perfect.
I've gone before. I'm Kristen Hosnick.
They can't hear you. You need to have the mic.
I'm a parent of a recent graduate. But I've chaperoned this trip before, and I know working with Melissa Sparks, the kids, the ITS students, choose their activities and choose their shows. So they're in the area of Stratford, Ontario, and there are multiple theaters and there's multiple workshops. So they will go and work with Tony Award-winning dancers who then put on a choreography workshop where the kids learn the same dance steps. So how to do these pieces, and some of it you've seen in the musicals, they brought that knowledge back with them. And the students led and created the dances that you saw in 2 of the musicals that were here at Vicksburg just this last year. So the students choose what's offered out of the list that's offered, and they'll choose what shows they want to see. Melissa Sparks tries her hardest to get tickets to all of these different shows with the budget that she has. There's meet and greets with the actors, so there's an 1 to 2 hour session with some of the actors, and then what they put into it, it's a Q&A session in addition to them speaking about their career and what it's like being an actor and actress. It's phenomenal working with the tech, the crew behind the scenes, so it's not just, oh, we're going to see a show. You're working with the people in these careers putting on these shows.
Oh, that's great.
So it's phenomenal. And then there's activities. In addition to the shows, there's team building and activities that she does with the kids.
Oh, that's great. I'm so sorry.
That's me too, sorry.
Are you?
Thank you. That was very interesting.
So that's an action item later in the meeting. So any other questions for Adam? Because that will come up. Okay.
Well, I do have a question. So last year when we went, or 2 years ago when we went, the credit card was declined at the hotel, so I had to put it on my own personal account because there wasn't an international, it was tripped because we were out of the country. So, I would like that addressed. Because paying for 20 of us to go, I had a quick call from my husband, hey, did you authorize this? So, yeah, I don't know what needs to happen here, but we're leaving the country with the credit card.
We can call and make sure whichever one she uses
Yep.
has access to Canada.
Perfect, thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. I think we need to buckle up because I think Steve has several.
Got a few things on the agenda this evening, yeah. Okay, all right, I'll start off. I'm gonna try to move through it fairly expeditiously. I see Rick's already got coffee, so he got the memo. So we might want to brew up some more. But what I'd like to do is start with just the monthly budget progress report for the month of May, month of May. Now, I'll make a few quick comments. That does include the proposed June amendment. I'm not really going to talk too much about those figures there. I'll just kind of focus on the primary report. I'll talk about the investment balances. And then from there, I'll move into the budget. And at that point, I'll move up and double checked it before we started. So I hopefully will be able to get it connected to the projector and be able to follow on screen. So starting with the monthly budget progress report, this includes general fund activity through the end of May. And again, it does include proposed amendments to the June budget. And so I'll just kind of go down real quickly. Let's blow this up just a little bit. And looking at revenue on a year-to-date basis, so total general fund revenue came in at $29,399,825, which is right around 76% of the revised projection. And you can see there that local revenue, we're getting real close at 98%. State revenue, of course, we don't collect our full state aid until we reach the end of August, so we're only about 70% through there. Federal revenue depends on when we send in reimbursements largely, so it's a much smaller number, but it's we're only about 45% on that. And then finally, the other revenue, which is largely revenue from KRESA for special education, the enhancement millage, and some other programs, stood at just under 99%. So on a year-to-date basis, we're tracking about where we'd expect, including the revisions. And so then looking down at the expenditures, total year-to-date expenditures, again, just looking at the general fund, stood at just shy of $31.6 million. That was 80.39% of the revised budget. And you can see there, I guess, a few quick comments. Based on the revisions, we seem to be tracking essentially like we would expect. We're a little bit ahead of where we were at this time last year, but we're very much in the same ballpark, and I think that is just would be related to the timing of some larger capital outlay and that type of stuff that happened earlier in the year. So total expenditures, $31,596,000. I'll talk more about it once we get into the amendment, but we had started the year projecting a shortfall of revenues under expenditures of that was somewhere around $750,000, $760,000, and you can see here that we're projecting to be just maybe a little bit better than that at $604,000. And again, I'll talk more about that, including what that means in terms of fund balance, what our overall level of fund balance looks like, and that type of thing. All right, looking at the second page of that report, expenditures summarized by object, and you can see that salaries and benefits, year to date, $25,135,081, right around 79% of the full year total. And then you can see below that, there's a breakdown for purchase services, supplies, capital outlay, and other. The only thing I'd like to point out is the other currently is at about 120% of the full year budget. Just a reminder that one of the other transactions that happens at the time that we close the books is we recover indirect costs from the food service fund. And so that is a credit or a negative that offsets that amount. So usually we are kind of ahead of budget at this time, so I don't really see any major concerns with that. All right, any questions on that part of it? Okay, if not, then we'll switch over to the schedule of investment withholdings. And this would be, all the investments would not include cash balances such as checking accounts or that type of thing, but it includes all our, these would all be considered cash equivalent investments because they've got quick liquidity. And they typically, they're valued very similarly to mutual fund or money markets, I would say, where you expect to see a stable value. You don't typically see gains or losses on these. And you can see they're broken down by fund that we, in the 2022 Building and Site Fund, had just under $3 million. The 24 Building and Site Fund was $6,571,000. Debt retirement funds stood at $1.1 million. And then finally, the general fund at $5,146,000. You can see the interest rates continue to be pretty stable. They're ticking down just ever so slightly, really just a few basis points a month at this point. But it'll be interesting to see where we go from here. I think it's, you know, we do expect to see some rate cuts at some point this year. It's just a question of when that'll be or what might change in the meantime. So, any questions on the investments? All right. Now, pardon me for a second as I get to the main piece here.
You can take his chair, he wanted it for you.
Let's see. That doesn't look good. Let's see.
Budget's a mess.
Yeah. Let's try this again. It worked fine when I first plugged it in.
Well, it looked great for me.
All right, let's see what happens here. It came through fine on,
Yeah, I'm getting the Windows screen.
well, I don't know if we have anybody subject to seizures or anything.
Oh my gosh.
I'll say mine, it looks excellent.
I'm not too sure what.
Guess Gary's presenting for you.
Yeah, any recommendations here?
Replug the monitor. My screen.
Where's that guy that's retiring, that IT guy? Can you come back up?
So weird, when I first plugged this in, it worked fine.
Looks perfect there.
Yeah.
Actually get me in my That would be funny.
Have a backup cord?
Well, let's see here.
Just weird that it worked before.
What's that?
You have the one in there?
I don't know if we can, I didn't see the one that was in there.
It was working fine when you first hooked it up. Well, it looks fine on my screen.
All right, well, we just try to power through.
People on the screens.
All my years of using it, I've never seen it look like that.
Try to reboot.
While we're
Yeah, but
waiting.
then you'll,
Will that not go through your?
the stream will see it only works.
Yeah.
Get a bigger hand.
All right, well,
Kelly was wondering this was part of this time, because we have a 30-minute time limit. Discounts. She was afraid to ask, so I said I'll ask.
I'm just wondering if my technology is gonna work or not.
If you need to be entertained while they're working on that, after we had an electronic medical record in my office, we had a power outage one day. And, you know, being a more senior, seasoned doctor, I was used to pencil and paper. So I grab a pencil and paper, and who's my next patient but an Amish man? So I walked in and said, I hope you don't mind, the computers are down, can I use pencil and paper? And he was okay with it.
let's see.
What if you tried to run the actual show?
No.
That's gonna be raw.
Just look at your screen.
All right,
Do you think like the bulb's going bad or something?
that, yeah, that's,
That's kind of biggie. Steve's not getting a report. Lunchtime.
now, is it, well, on the screen or no? Okay,
No, this is right.
all right, is there a way, can you just put a camera
Just take it
on
off
it?
the camera.
Here it comes up, yeah.
Okay.
At the same time of day.
Thank you.
Yay, Gary.
All right, well, here we go. Welcome to the 25-26 budget hearing, where we're also going to talk a little bit about the amendment. I'm going to try to go through it fairly quickly, but let me just kind of start off with a recap. We're going to talk about some of the significant revisions included in the amendment. Oops, says 24-24, supposed to be 24-25. And the proposed 25-26, and the 25-26 budget, we're going to talk about key assumptions and just how little we know right now. We'll talk about fund balance, and then there's an administrative piece. We have to conduct the budget hearing, which is really pretty simple. We'll talk about that when we get to that point, but it's really just to formally set the property tax rate for the general fund for the non-homestead property tax millage. We'll talk more about that when we get to it. All right, I'm going to start and with just kind of a quick recap of what last year ended up in terms of the actuals, and then we'll talk about the preliminary budget, the revisions, and then finally the June amendment. We'll kind of cover these before we get into next year. So, okay, last year, I don't have a pointer, I apologize for that, but last year, actual numbers, we had total revenue of $38,325,000, total expenditures $36,984,000. We still were working off a significant amount of COVID money at that time, and like a lot of districts, we were adding to fund equity. And last year we added 1.34 million to fund balance, which started the year at 7,874,000 and ended the year at 9,215,000. So we'll talk more about that in a little bit. Now, we knew going into current year for 24-25 that the COVID money was wrapping up, but that was going to become less and less of a variable for us. And so we knew that the budget would look a little bit different. We knew that we probably wouldn't build a significant addition to fund equity. And in fact, we had allocated a significant amount of money for capital expenditures in the current year. The main items that we purchased were 6 school buses and a couple of maintenance vehicles. And so those, in total, that was around $1 million for those items. And so, you know, when I, at least from my perspective, when I look at the budget and when we have significant amounts going to capital expenditures, you know, gives you a little bit of comfort when if you have a negative or a draw on your fund equity, because when you're making capital expenditures, those are long-lived assets. You know, those buses, we typically get 10 years out of buses. So, you know that we're putting over $1 million into capital investments. You can kind of look at that and say, we're okay, we're not really doesn't appear to be a structural deficit situation. So we expected to reduce fund equity by about $770,000, which at that point would have meant that we would end the year at just under $8.5 million of fund equity. The revisions to both revenues and expenditures are pretty significant, and that's not uncommon. We see that, and particularly in the last couple of years, there's just been, the budget process has dragged on, and it's gotten, I would say, a lot more complicated at the state level in terms of how they allocate funds to schools, the number of restrictions, and, it used to be, the vast majority of money would come through the foundation allowance, and there were always additional programs for at-risk and that type of thing, but the legislature has really gotten pretty creative with how to pare down foundation increases and just how to try to target at least the legislature's interests and priorities, and they can sometimes do that in a way that makes our life pretty complicated. There were a lot of the grants that we received this year that we really didn't, we kind of were told to expect them, and some of them really didn't show up until April. And some of them, it's ridiculous, really. It's kind of crazy. As a lot of those new grants have all kinds of different requirements to them. How you can spend the money, and how you record keep, and it's become a little bit of a monster to try to keep all that stuff clear. Of course, we appreciate Gail and the curriculum office and all the work that you guys do to keep all that straight. It has become quite a bear. So I guess the good news is, the revisions are significant, but as of right now, based on what I see, it looks like we're going to end up the year a little bit better than we had originally estimated. So we're still looking at a shortfall, but now we're looking at about a $600,000 shortfall. It's not dramatically different than what we were looking at to start with, and that would keep our fund equity, if that's where we end up, at $8.6 million. All right? Are there any questions so far? All right, so next, I'll just kind of get into some of the changes, and this is where, stop me if I start to go too much in the weeds, but I'm going to try to keep it fairly high level. But there's one thing I think I would hope people can take away. There's just been a lot of moving parts at the state level, particularly. So when we adopted the budget, we had total expected revenues of $36,454,000. The majority of almost $2 million of our increased revenue comes from various grants at the state level. And a big part of them has been related to the pension system, or MIPSers. And you can see that this year, there were some new categoricals and some added categoricals. So 147C is there's money, the 147C money comes into the district from the state and it goes right back out to ORS or the pension system. We don't, on any given year, we don't have you can estimate what those amounts are going to be, but at the end of the day, it's not a major issue because the state can change that at any time, but there's no bottom line impact. Whatever money they send you you're going to send to the state. If they change that amount, that's going to change the amount that you send to the state. So we don't worry too much about that. And of that 742,000, that was about 400, it was over 400,000 was related to 147C. And then 147G, which was around 300,000, this is where it starts to get a little bit, you start to see some kind of different approaches from the legislature. And 147G was where it was the 3% required healthcare contribution for those employees that back in 2012 made an election in the retirement system to continue to receive health care in retirement. And in exchange for that, employees agreed at that time to contribute 3% of their salary into the system to pay specifically for the health care piece. Now 147G came along and said, pension system's in great shape, we don't need to do that anymore. The legislature didn't really at that time have a mechanism to undo that 3%. So that continued, the 3% withholding continued in the law, but then there was a categorical grant to the schools to refund that for all employees. So it's hard to, I don't want to belabor it too much, but it's kind of a convoluted mess to say, employees are going to pay this, but we really don't think you have to, but you're going to do it anyway, so we're going to give schools a pool of money to refund that, but it doesn't, the pool that they provide doesn't, it's based on a formula at the state level and it doesn't really line up with our actual payroll or anything else. It's kind of in the ballpark, but it's, that's money that is then, it's retirement related, but it's paid out as salaries. So that amount is actually, at 320,000 is reflected in salaries along with some payroll taxes, because when we pay it out, then it's not subject to retirement because it's already been charged retirement, but it is subject to payroll taxes. So it just, it gets a little bit convoluted. And then we had some deferred revenue last year, 417,000. Deferred revenue is the money comes from the state, but we haven't met the requirements to recognize it yet. And so we carried it, and we didn't recognize it as revenue in 23-24. We held it as a liability until we spent the money and then recorded the revenue in the current year. And so that was, there were two sections there. Section 22L, which was another categorical grant that was designed for increased educator compensation. So, and we knew that we were paying that out under the terms of letter of agreement with the DEA this year. And so the revenue that was tied to that, we held as a liability and recognized that in the current year. Similarly, 22L was transportation funding. So that was money that was new categorical last year for, that was paid out to districts based on a percentage of their transportation expenditures, which is good for a district like Vicksburg because we're geographically spread out. And so that was about 280,000. And we applied that to the purchase of buses this year. So we carried that revenue from last year into this year and used a portion of that to pay for the buses. The educator compensation piece that I was talking about was actually 27 now, so it's those two items right there. We do receive, in the current year, we received $259,000 because the district has been experiencing declining enrollment over time. And I've got a slide in a little while that will show you kind of enrollment, what's been happening with that. Finally, there's always a true-up process, and so there's a process of adjusting prior year revenues. We also received $184,000 additional revenue related to special education from the state that came through in the current year. We don't know about that until it happens, and so it's kind of based on a look-back calculation. So that's money that we received in the current year. And then finally, there were some additional categoricals, 23G, 35J, and a handful of other ones. And that's, where I think a lot of the unnecessary complication has come into what we do and how we spend money. So total increase in state revenue was just under $2 million. And then we had some additional revenue increases. One for the, other, so the federal, local, and the other revenues increased by $270,000. And a big portion of that was related to an increase in the special ed payout from K-Reset. All right, so total projected revenue increase of $2,242,000, which takes our revenues from 36.4 to 38.7 million. On the, another typo here, I said total projected general fund revenues, I should say expenditures. Increases here, again, significant increases to those budgets. We went from 37.2 million to 39.3. And a big portion of that is related to compensation, but that isn't terribly surprising because over 80% of our general fund budget is for personnel anyway. That's where we spend the majority of our money. Now, just kind of breaking that down a little bit, I looked at total compensation and broke it down, one to just straight increases in salaries and benefits over what we had projected without regard to some of the things flowing through the state. And so there was an increase. This is a result of additional positions that are hired, collective bargaining, all the various stipends and that type of thing. And that amount, $641,000, that also includes the FICA and retirement. So there's about 41% of that 641 is related to those benefits, all right? In addition, I talked about some of those categoricals. So section 147G and 27L. Those funds were received this year, but they're also paid out as compensation. So those would be, I would say, those are going to be largely non-recurring. Now, in 25-26, what's supposed to happen, when we talk about that 3% healthcare contribution, that is supposed to be legislatively eliminated, but that won't be effective until October 1st. So, we should be out of the business of withholding one amount for the healthcare and then reimbursing another amount and then trying to make it true up over time. All right, so that $455,000, I would say, since those were tied to specific grant funds, those would be typically non-recurring, so you don't expect to see those happen next year. $442,000 of increased section 147C, and again, that's the money that just goes, it's just a straight pass-through from the state through the district to the retirement system. So that has no bottom line impact. And then other fringe benefits increased by $88,000. And, that's going to be things like workers' compensation, a little bit of health, health insurance, dental, vision, those types of things are included in that. There was also there was 27K, I think, which was the reimbursement for employees with student loans. I mean, so again, that's money that the state sends us and then we include in compensation. So that's a portion of that 88,000. And then on supplies, purchase services, capital outlay, and other, those things that are not directly related to employee compensation increased by 451,000. And that's kind of, like I said, that's kind of in proportion to the budget as a whole. So that increase, right around 80% of that is related to personnel, and the remainder is related to the non-staffing. We continue to see quite a bit of inflation, a lot of cost pressure, a lot of curriculum-related expenses, many of which are grant-funded. So some of those are also reflected in the increased revenue. And a lot of, like correct me if I'm wrong, but I think 23G and 35J are largely professional development and materials. So, that's going to be a chunk of that. 35J, sure. So total budgeted expenditures, $39,301,000. All right. Questions, comments at this point? Yeah.
I don't understand declining enrollment.
Okay, that's a good question. So declining enrollment is I don't have the section number memorized. I can look it up. But declining, we're 70% of our funding is based on the formula of how many kids are enrolled multiplied by the state's foundation allowance. And like probably 70 to 80% of the districts in the state of Michigan, the population of school-age kids has not been increasing in the state. That goes back to probably 2000 almost. And so the state does provide, and it changes from year to year, but there is a categorical grant to help districts who are experiencing a decline in their enrollment. You receive a portion of the foundation allowance that you would have had your enrollment been stable to try to help you manage that reduction in cost or reduction in revenue. All right. In our case, the big change was the partnership with, the virtual partnership, and that had equated to 60 or 70 FTE. I want to say last year, and as that program was curtailed, that has significantly reduced our revenue also, and so that categorical is designed to offset that. It's not forever. It's I think it's kind of over a 3-year. There's a 3-year kind of moving average on your enrollment that the state uses to calculate that. All right. Does that answer your question, Tina?
Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
All right. Let's see. All right. Any questions? Let me just go back here real quick. So, at this point, the gross revenues and expenditures went up by a substantial amount, but they largely offset each other. Not a significant change in the net result expected for the year. Any questions on that part? Okay, if not, then where it gets really kind of head scratching at this point is planning for next year. And it's there aren't very many years when we have a state budget by June 30th. But even then, most districts hold their hearing earlier in June, like we're doing it on the 9th. So, we're not unused to making some projections and predicting and then truing up. But this year feels different. There's almost the lack of progress at the state level is fairly disconcerting. The associations usually keep us very much up to date on all the various proposals and how those are working through the system. And we can at any time look at comparisons of the governor's recommendation compared to the most current version of the House and the Senate. And you can kind of start to see where the direction is headed. But as of right now, we have a proposal from the governor that dates back to February. We have a proposal from the Senate, which is kind of in the ballpark. And then there's no proposal from the House. Or there was an early proposal from the House, which I don't think you can even look at because it dates back to March and it had a big reduction. It was a net reduction in school district revenue. I don't really even know what the legislature was trying, I think there was some posturing and some positioning at the time. The understanding is, and people may have read about it, the House is working on a proposal. We should see it fairly soon. It sounds completely different from the governor and the Senate. So I think we've got a long way to go. And so based on that, I'll tell you the assumptions that I used and then we can talk about them. First, enrollment. We've been declining and looks like this year, going into next year, we're, projecting another small reduction. That is, and frankly, so we tend to, and I've got a graph on enrollment, but I'll just make a few comments real quick. We tend to gain more students than we lose through schools of choice. So we're a net recipient district, and we've been a stable district. When we see declines in enrollment, I truly don't see any indication that represents a flight of people or that there's a problem. It's a shift that I think is going on in a majority of districts. So this assumes that our schools of choice balance stays essentially the same, and it's kind of a straight rollover between where we think kindergarten is coming in and the graduating seniors that we know are gone. So, Rick.
Steve, have you guys looked at it just versus districts that are like us, kind of like on the academic side, we benchmark via similar districts with the enrollment piece?
We've looked at maps and that you can, there's some color-coded maps in that, but haven't done that specifically, and that's certainly something that we could do, but it can be tricky just because the economic situation or the development situation between districts might be dramatically different.
Yeah. I just wonder over time if the districts we kind of benchmark against are also seeing similar kind of decrease.
Well, I can say that I won't pull it up here tonight, but I can provide some additional information. But I want to say, if you go just thinking back to that statewide chart of K-12 enrollment, it was well over 1.5 million statewide in the early 2000s, and now it's under 1.4 million. Mm-hmm. So it's been, I would say I'm gonna guess pretty close to a 10% drop. You'll see this in a future slide, but over about 15 years, I want to say we're down about 6%.
Okay. I know at the estimating conference, they gave some projections on state enrollment.
Yeah.
I can't remember what it was. It was definitely declining.
Yeah, it's been a steady trend statewide.
Yeah.
So we can get some additional
My assumption too is that that'll continue probably for the next decade.
And I don't see any indication that trend is going to change, And I mean, there's some significant demographic shifts with that too. Mm-hmm. People having fewer kids, waiting longer to have kids. Yeah. Just even my own example, I was 40 before we had our first kids, and I remember when everyone else my age was having kids, there were not very many people, there just weren't that many 40-year-old new parents. And now it just feels like there's a lot more of that. I don't have data on that.
Yeah,
but,
yeah. Thank you.
But it is, yeah, we can certainly look at that.
Steve, you had alluded to the program we had with Lighthouse.
Yes.
And we were trying to provide services to homeschooled and other kids, but it also was a net gain for us on the revenue side.
Absolutely.
And we stopped that because of issues with the amount of administration it was taking to just keep track of FTEs and all of that.
Well,
So is that having much impact here, and where do we stand with that whole issue?
So a big part of that related to the state taking a different approach to that and a far more stringent approach because a lot of districts were doing similar things and a lot of districts were capturing some additional FTE and the state, it was costing the state a lot of money. So that was, that also was a hit that we expected to take this year. And I want to say by the end of last year, I want to say we were down to anywhere from 40 to 60 kids. I can get you the specific numbers on that, but it would represent probably a couple $100,000 reduction of, we brought in a few $100,000 more in revenue than we spent on that program. It wasn't terribly expensive, so.
But that change was made last fiscal year, and you're assuming we're not going to resume that program, and so.
Not in the.
So these are real numbers that are.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yep. Okay, so enrollment. For all intents and purposes, projecting that to be essentially flat, down just a little bit. Per pupil funding, so this is a big one. Last year, we thought we had a really good idea what was going to happen at the state level. The House, the Governor, the Senate were pretty closely aligned. And I want to say, in trying to determine what the foundation allowance would be, we were probably, I think they were all within probably $100 of each other. And this was like this completely out of left field. I remember playing in a golf outing and finding out that the legislature had met late into the night. They had finalized the school aid budget, and there wasn't going to be any increase to the foundation allowance. And so we started the year with no increase to the foundation, which was that was a shock. That was offset with a promise that they would work some things around with the retirement system. And I want to say it wasn't until November when they had that figured out. And so, and I didn't even go into this level of complexity in here, but we ended up with no foundation allowance and a grant to refund a portion of our retirement. So again, just not really, I can speculate on why that seemed like a good idea, but I don't think it was a good idea. At any rate, we actually ended up doing a little bit better under that regime because we didn't necessarily absorb the full impact of a decline in enrollment that we would have had the funding been strictly in the per pupil foundation, if that makes any sense. So we did a little bit better, so that wasn't bad. But again, it's just that uncertainty of, okay, what is the funding going to be? How is this going to look? And how much is it going to be? And that wasn't figured out until, I believe, November. All right. However, right now, the governor and the Senate are both right around $10,000 for the foundation allowance. Now, the House, we'll see. But I've used 10,000, which represents a 4% increase over where we were. It's $392 a kid. And I guess we'll just have to wait and see on that. Revenue consensus, there's a January and May revenue consensus conference. And usually, the January conference is sort of the preliminary, the first one that kind of leads into the budget season, and the governor then will start making plans based on that. And then usually we see a lot of movement after the May, because that's just several more months of data, and you have a better sense for how things are gonna turn out. There's been, you know, a little crazy out there in terms of the economy and what's happening, you know, just uncertainty around tariffs and everything else. And so, and particularly in a state like Michigan where, you know, we don't have the concentration of auto industry that we had, it's still a significant piece of industry. And so when, you know, tariffs and those kinds of things are, you know, on the table, you have to pay attention because it just creates a lot of uncertainty. The good news at the May consensus conference was that things still look pretty good on a statewide level. The school aid budget projections were a little bit ahead of where they were in January, and so as of right now, there's really no hit worked in for a slowdown in the economy or anything else. So that's something to just keep in mind. So anyway, $10,000 per pupil funding is what we're projecting. And then employee, so then I just kind of break it down into the major categories. Employee comp is projected to go up by about 600,000, 0.58 million. That is a 1.8% increase over the level that we are today. But there's a lot of things that go into that. We had a lot of retirements tonight, and so particularly on the professional staff, when we have retirements, that creates a savings opportunity because we try to hire educators that are freshly out of school, earlier in their careers. Now that's been a little bit of a challenge with, you know, teacher shortages and that type of thing. I think we've definitely trended towards hiring a more experienced level of teacher. But given how much we invest in professional development and the importance of kind of developing our talent into the Vicksburg way of doing things, you know, I'm hoping that we'll be able to see kind of a return to hiring newer, less experienced staff. That generates a significant savings. So ideally, when you look at, you know, there are also built-in salary increases called steps. Steps are pay increases. They happen automatically from year to year. Those retirements help underwrite that. And so it never works out perfectly. In some years where you have fewer retirements, you don't capture as much savings, and so your costs increase a little bit faster. Some years you have more retirements, and this is a year where we had quite a few retirements. So that definitely helps. But we know that we're bargaining, we're negotiating, and we'll have to see where those go. But the entire BEA contract is open for negotiation, and I know we'll spend a lot of time on that, a lot of time talking about compensation. Every other employee is going to expect something as well. So, you know, this is a big unknown right now, and of course, it's really hard to bargain a contract if you don't know what your funding is.
Right.
So there's a lot of assumptions in here, and they can all change, and they really all will change to some degree. But looking at total employee count of 32.4 million, which is only a 1.8% increase. But remember, in addition to those savings from the retirements, and presuming that we hire less experienced staff, there was also a substantial amount of one-time pays. The MIPSR 3% refunds, the 27L stipends, you know, those come off this year as well. So when you look at that 1.8% increase, that still assumes that there's going to be increases that, you know, counts for steps, that there's going to be some increases to compensation levels, even though we don't know what that's going to be at this point. We also don't know because all those positions haven't been filled. So it's an estimate at this point. Let's see, supplies and purchase services. See that going up by a little bit less, or 0.17 million, 170,000, which would take those to 6.1 million. Hopefully we can come in better than that, you know, but some of those costs are outside of our control too. I mean, electricity, bus fuel, natural gas. Those are, you know, those add up to a substantial number. And we'll just have to see how those kind of play out over time. But everything else is going up as well. Paper, you know, every supply, I mean, costs are just going up. So I've worked in a provision for that.
So you've got, sorry, Steve, you have about 2.5%, it looks like, in the increase, the 0.17 million increase, and you feel okay about that. Obviously, inflation has seemed to have cooled off a little
Yeah.
bit, but, yeah, okay.
So it's not, you know, I feel like it's not a huge increase, that hopefully it's a little bit conservative, and inflation definitely has cooled off.
Yeah.
And we'll just have to kind of see where we go from here, so. All right. Let's see, capital outlay, expect that to shrink by about $1 million, and that's really because we just bought 6 buses and a couple trucks. There's still money in there for capital outlay. You know, there are other things that we still need that aren't necessarily provided for through the bond. But significant, you know, we expect a big reduction in capital outlay this year.
Steve, just, it's a bit of an aside, but for our bus fleet, it seems like our strategy has been about every 3 years buy a third of the fleet because it's about a 10-year
Yeah.
process. So we bought them last year. In a couple of years, we'll be looking at,
Yes.
because we're trying to replace about a third at a time
Yeah.
over a
Yep.
10-year cycle. Yeah.
So when I think about, okay, how are we doing sort of structurally, I look at like the buses and, you know, break that down into a third and say, if we're gonna just replace buses every year and stay on top of it, you know, it'd be 3 buses, or, you know, it might be 250 or 300,000 a year to just do that. But we've been doing it, it seems to work well to kind of do it in chunks like that. Another, you know, there is another strategy, and that would be, you know, we'll be talking more about a prospective bond issue. You know, buses can be included in bond issues, but it's, you know, you have to look at all your needs and everything that you want to accomplish. And so, you know, that has been something I've wanted to look at, but, you know, like this last go around, we knew that we would need everything we could get just to handle the mechanical upgrades and that kind of stuff. So I'm not advocating that necessarily, but it's one thing that you can do. We really have removed a lot of the burden of facilities and equipment and that type of thing from the general fund. So,
Right.
you know, we have, you know, we're pretty insulated from a lot of that. And then finally, you know, based on all those, and I just want to stress that these are pretty huge assumptions at this point. I'm always a little nervous, but this is a tough one to swallow just because you just feel like the last couple of years, how things have kind of gone in a different direction. It's less predictable, I would say, and so I'm just very anxious to see what the actual state budget will look like. All right. So any questions on this? I guess I'll just say real quickly, if this were to play out exactly, which of course it won't, you know, we would still plan or expect to end the year with a general fund balance of just over $8 million, which puts us, we're still, you know, just over 20%, which is a good position to be in. All right. Oops. So I just want to go through some of this stuff fairly quickly. Just again, looking at next year, I just want to talk about, okay, here's what our total revenue looks like, here's what we're projecting. This will kind of lead a little bit into the discussion about property taxes and that type of thing. The projected revenues, again, based on those huge assumptions, we would see just under 38.5 in total revenue. And so let's just talk real quickly. The local revenue of 3,528,000. Well, 2.7 of that is for the local non-homestead property tax. So that's part of that foundation allowance. So when you think about our base funding, just know that a portion of our local revenue is related to the amount that the state says we should get. All right. State revenue, 31.3 million. And it's really hard to say exactly like what those grants are going to be because they've changed so much from year to year. But I'm making some assumptions that, you know, we can't necessarily say like these are the specific categoricals that are going to be funded and what they're going to be required to be used on, and here's how much. I'm kind of looking at, okay, our overall state revenue, what's changing with some of the retirement categoricals, and just trying to figure out, okay, we should land somewhere in this ballpark if our revenue collections are on track and everything else, the assumption that the state is gonna appropriate roughly that amount of money, even if we don't know exactly how yet. So I don't like to say that, but I feel I have to be really transparent that it'd be real easy to come in and say, no, we're gonna have a $5 million shortfall right now because we don't know what these grants are gonna be, or $3 million, or just whatever. But I feel like it's likely at this point that the state will figure it out in some fashion, and that we're not going to see a huge reduction year over year, but it's kind of a leap of faith at the same time. And that's hard to do with the state sometimes, but I don't know what else to do in this case. Federal revenue, we don't expect a lot of change there. That's going to be primarily Title I, Title II, and a couple miscellaneous grants like Medicaid outreach and Title III. Now, we don't know what's going to happen with federal revenue, but my assumption here is if even if the U.S. Department of Education looks completely different, my assumption here is that those funds will continue to flow through to districts, and they kind of flow through the state anyway. We really receive very little funding. I can't think of anything right now that comes directly from the federal government. So I can see things changing, but I'm making an assumption that overall that revenue is going to continue. All right. And then other revenue is expected to be essentially flat at 3.3 million, and that's going to be special education, enhancement millage, and a few other things. All right. The foundation allowance, here's where I just kind of point out, that the actual foundation allowance based on our enrollment, if our enrollment is 2,540, and if it's $10,000 per kid, it's pretty simple, 25.4 million, and this just demonstrates that local non-homestead operating millage comes out of that, all right? And we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. But you can see no real change here. The vast majority of our revenue comes from the state of Michigan. On the expenditure side, here's kind of what we're looking at, rolling things forward. We're expecting total expenditures, $39,035,000. And you can see that between basic programs, added needs would be special education, our Title I, all the additional supports that we provide. We also include career and technical education. Basic programs would just be the basic K through 12 instruction. We're at about just under 58% there. And support services, I just break these down a little bit. Pupil services, instructional services, and building administration should come in around 6.6 million. General administration, Board of Education, business office, and central services, which includes all the human resources, technology, payroll, everything that the board does, legal fees, just a lot of general overhead expenses.
We expect those to come in at $2,872,000. Facilities and transportation at $5,632,000. Below that, athletics and community services at just over 1.55. And then you might recall earlier, it seems like a long time ago I mentioned this, but interfund transfers, that 110, that represents indirect costs that are recovered from the food service fund back to the general fund. All right, so that's just kind of a breakdown of expenditures by function. Any questions on that? All right. This should say 25, 26, but just looking at expenditures by object, we expect total, out of the total budget of $39.03 million, we expect about 83% of that to be for compensation, which would be salaries and benefits. And there is an increase, an expected increase even over this year on the section 147C. So that's, part of that 32.4 million. And let's see, purchase services, supplies, talked about those, capital outlay, 350,000, other expenditures at 165. That's largely the way we are now. The one thing I would say is employee compensation at 83%, starting to get up there, and it's something, we have to be thinking about. It used to be, kind of the threshold that districts wanted to make sure they weren't outside of was sort of 85%. I think back to those days, and those days were before everyone had outsourced their sub-teaching, their custodial operations, and those types of things. So I would argue that we have a lot of personnel costs that aren't reflected in employee compensation and instead are in purchase services. And so that's just something to be cognizant of. Now, that said, we've also, as I said, we've had a program to provide for our capital needs where we've been issuing bonds every few years. And so, that has definitely taken some of that pressure off the general fund, but it's just something we have to, I think, be aware of. All right? Any questions here?
Steve?
Yeah.
My understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, is that our bond we've used to pay for technology as well.
Yes.
So that would be a capital outlay expense that could be in the general fund.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right, and that's significant because you're constantly replacing Chromebooks.
Yes.
And,
Yep. Yeah, that is significant. I want to say, think in terms of probably on an annual basis, 300,000 to 500,000. We're replacing a lot of Chromebooks, a lot of switches, cameras, network infrastructure, all that cybersecurity, all that stuff. So, and that, that does help. That is largely, obviously not like the personnel side of technology, but the capital side certainly is largely covered by the bond.
Right.
All right. This is just kind of a quick recap. We started talking about how we ended up last year, and I won't go through this in detail. Just kind of note that at the end of last year, June 30, 2024, we ended at $9.2 million in fund equity. We're still very, very, we expect to still be very healthy. We, as of right now, still expect that to exceed $8 million next year. That's a healthy amount. But I'll say one of the things that kind of, I think, helps us to get through the uncertainty of not knowing what our funding is going to be is the fact that we do have reserves to, and I know I've said it before, I won't belabor the point, but if you start a year and you have a surprise where you're down, 130 kids, which happened one year, if you don't have that fund equity there, you can be making some pretty drastic decisions at the beginning of the school year, and that's not good for anybody, and that certainly doesn't lend itself to the best instruction and that kind of thing. You're shifting classes and letting go of staff and that kind of thing. So it's the fact that we have a decent fund equity allows us to make adjustments and not have to be quite as reactive. Now, you can't kick the can down the road forever.
And you can only spend it out of fund equity one time. So it has to be, I think we just have to be deliberate and intentional and kind of strategic about it.
Well, historically, because I was on the board when that happened, that our count was down, and we could be very intentional. That's when we went from block scheduling to a 7-hour day in the high school, because there were inherent savings in that. And we didn't have to do that mid-semester, we didn't have to pink slip anybody. We did
Right.
draw down that fund balance, and we could do that in a considered manner that
Yep.
didn't disrupt
Right,
people's education.
absolutely.
Kids didn't have to switch classes because there's only 2 third grades instead of 3,
Yeah.
that kind of thing.
Exactly, yep. No, that's very well put. So yeah, we continue to hang in there. Again, based on projections, we expect a reduction this year as well as next year in fund equity. But nothing, I think, that, is something that we can't adjust for going forward. Enrollment.
Steve, is there just a philosophical question I'm just trying to learn, like, to not set a zero basically try to break even versus have, I know the $567,000 deficiency is kind of de minimis, but is there a reason why we do that versus just try to set to zero with all the uncertainty that we do have?
Yeah, I feel like I try to understand what the revenue picture looks like as well as I can. And in this case, and then, I try to do the same thing with the expenditures. And in this case, if I was going to set it to zero, I would probably have to either increase my revenue assumption or identify things to cut.
Yeah.
And I don't, given all the questions right now, it would be hard to say,
Premature.
hey, Keevan, we need to cut $500,000.
Yeah.
80% our staff, how do you want to do this? So I don't know if I'm answering your question or
Yeah,
not.
I think too, over time, just as we draw our fund balance down, when
Then
does that happen? Like 20%, or is there, it's not a
I would say
black and white, but,
the lower that level gets,
yeah.
the more we have to slow down and be very diligent and look at those things and identify and work ahead a little bit, because you can't just cut a lot of costs without putting the work in and engaging. So it's more, this, to me, more of a, okay, this is the way I see it.
Yeah.
If the, the board's charge or Keevan's charge was, hey, we need a balanced budget next year, we can certainly do that, but the more specificity, the more information we have on revenues, the easier, all right?
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it does.
Well, our fund balance, this is higher as a percentage than we've been, I think, in quite some time. And the COVID money that came in helped us to recover that. And so it was a lot, there were several years where we were getting nervous, because I think our fund balance
Absolutely.
was like 12%.
We were under 10% for a while.
Yep.
Okay.
Which is.
Yeah, and I'll show
scary.
that here in a minute. It leaves not a lot of room for,
To absorb change or, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you.
okay, enrollment. I think when it's natural, you drive around, you see a new neighborhood go in, you see new houses, you see a lot of construction, you automatically assume, man, we're gonna be bursting at the seams, And while those neighborhoods popping up, they create some challenges based on where they're located. We are, in terms of our capacity for students, we are pretty low compared to where we've been. And I think it's important to kind of recognize that so if I just look, there's a little bit going on here. This looks at our enrollment back to 2009. And over that time, there have been a couple things. This says purple is what started off as the WAY program, which is now Vicksburg Pathways, and that has contributed a lot of resources and provided incredibly valuable service for our community and students. Dave mentioned the virtual partnership with Lighthouse. You can see that represented for 5 years at the top of the graph. And, we were, that program in particular really helped the budget. And, between all three of those, our traditional in-person enrollment, as well as pathways, and then the virtual, we were pushing 2,700. But if you just look at the kids who show up every day, back in 2009, that was 2,594 kids. And based on the fall count in 2024, we were down to 2,433. If you go back before then, we were closer to 2,800, So, I know, when the neighborhoods come in, you end up with some bubbles, and it got real crowded at Sunset for a while, and it still is, but we're about 70 or 80 kids lower than we were probably 3 or 4 years ago. And now we see it more at Toby because, we've got neighborhoods and a lot of kids going there. But, overall, we've got capacity. So I just like to point that out. Fund balance. This is our fund balance back to 2004. And so there's a few things going on here. The first y-axis is the absolute dollar value of fund balance. The bars, the bar graph represents the level of fund balance at the end of each year. The trend line shows the percentage. And you can see that going back into 16, 17, 18, we were hovering around 10%. And when you get down to 5%, then some protocols kick in the state of Michigan, now you have some responsibilities to meet with the Treasury Department and talk about your plans. And then obviously if you go into a deficit, that's a whole other level. Nobody here wants to deal with that, so hopefully that won't be the case anytime soon. But you can see, I think back to the early days of COVID and how much uncertainty there was. And the economy was crumbling. Unemployment went through the roof. Meaning we were like, not sure what's going to happen with the school budget, but it ended up being, pretty beneficial overall as it resulted in a tremendous amount of revenue. But with that going, now that that's fully essentially gone away, there's some adjustments that have to be made, and I like to think that we're able to make those incrementally over time to try to keep everything in balance. So,
does our fund balance have any impact on what we get from the state? If we have a higher fund balance, does it reduce the percentage we get or anything like that?
No, it doesn't. Now, interestingly, there have been, I can think back over my time here, there have been occasions where, it's just whatever way the political winds are blowing at the time in the state budget. There have been times where, the legislature has talked about recapturing excess fund balance from districts, but that has never gotten any kind of legs as far as I know. But they also don't, if you get lower, if you go low, there's no additional funding for that either, and a lot of additional oversight. And I guess one thing I would add is this does affect our bonding capacity to some degree. Last year the district received a rating upgrade from Standard & Poor's, so we're at AA. And that, we can take advantage of the state's credit rating as well, but to have that credit rating kind of on a standalone basis for the district helps. And that when we go out to market and issue bonds, that affects the rate that we pay, and that determines how much we can borrow. And so it's important to try to maintain a strong fiscal position in the district, I guess I would say. A lot of good news here, though. We still expect to be over 20%. And I just have some notes there on the importance of trying to maintain hopefully at least 15 to 20%. And we've talked about some of this, just the ability to deal with things that come up that you don't anticipate. And the less fund balance you have, the less flexibility you have for those kinds of things. So I don't have to belabor that anymore unless there are other comments or questions. And then finally, I just want to talk, I've talked about a lot of this as we go. A lot of uncertainty. What is our enrollment going to look like? I feel that's the one number I probably feel the least amount of angst about. It can surprise us for sure, but all indications are pretty good right now. Obviously, the final state budget, including what the final amounts are and what the categoricals are and what restrictions and requirements go along with it. Economic uncertainty just on a more global basis that can affect the state budget, including tariffs, inflation, potential of a recession at some point. The CTE Center, you know, there's a whole change in the model of how CTE is being provided within the county. And it's exceedingly difficult today to really know for sure what effect that's going to have on us. We should be no more than break even, but it remains to be seen a little bit what happens with our enrollments and what happens countywide. I don't think we're going to, take a huge hit there, but it's just another question mark on exactly how that's going to look. Then obviously collective bargaining, over 80% of our budget goes to personnel, and we'll be meeting with personnel quite a bit this summer, I suspect. All right, so keep those things in mind. And then finally, I promise we're getting close. Just want to talk about the hearing that we need to have, and the hearing should be very, very quick. Just want to read this section that's included in the resolution. In part, it says, be it further resolved that to support the proposed budget for fiscal year 25-26, schools shall levy its authorized millage rate of 18 mills of ad valorem property taxes on non-homestead property, excluding principal residence, qualified ag, qualified forest, and industrial personal property, and that such millage is estimated to total $2,709,000, and that millage shall be used to support general operating expenditures of the district. And also would like to note, this isn't really subject to the hearing, but our debt tax rate of 6.6 mils will remain unchanged for next year. All right. Let's see, next. Just want to point out that those property taxes only apply to the tax base that I referred to. Does not include principal residences or other qualified properties. And that millage, this is another one of those things, I talk about this once in a while, where there are things that we have to do in Michigan to get our full funding, or just we have to follow these procedures, one of which is every so often we have to go out to the voters and ask them to approve this property tax, 18 mills. It can be a little bit divisive because there's a tendency to say, well, none of us pay this. This is on non-homestead property. But people pay it, if you have a second home or a business or whatever else, it's a significant amount of money. However, if we don't collect it, then that state foundation allowance is just kind of a hypothetical number that we don't receive. We've got to levy the 18 mills, but then to make it a little bit more complicated, there's a procedure called the Headley rollback procedure where the operating millage rate can erode over time and be you can have there's a mandatory reduction in the tax rate when taxable values increase faster than the rate of inflation. And so, but the funny thing about that is that has no bearing on what the per pupil foundation allowance is. And so if we don't levy, if the Headley rollback means we can only levy 17 of the 18 mills, the state doesn't care. They still assume that we levy the full 18 mills. So it's one of those things that just to me, it seems a little bit like an exercise to try to explain to people every year, and go out and explain it to the voters, and then, conduct an election. It's just kind of, but it is what it is. It's what we have to do. So because of that, we have the ability to request an increase above the 18 mils, which we've done, but we can never levy more than 18. So even though our maximum levy today is 18.5604, we will only levy 18.000. And then finally, this tax was approved by voters in 2022, and it goes through the end of 2026. So in 2027, we'll have an opportunity to explain that to voters. So it's, school's been doing it for over 20 years now, or 30 years. But amazingly, somewhere in the state, every single time it goes down, and then schools have to scramble and figure out, okay, what are we going to do? We have to get this passed because we can't operate without it. So that is kind of, that's kind of it. So I don't know if there are questions or comments. I know it's a lot of information, and I always struggle with how deep into the details or how high level. So I'm always looking for feedback, or if you have questions or comments, anything you want me to follow up on after the fact, let me know. But if not, then we should open a hearing and take any comments about the proposed tax rate, and then if not, then my part will be done.
So I have to use a gavel here, it sounds like. And do we have to, okay, so this is the annual public hearing, so we can open that, and then it's open to public comment on the budget?
Yeah, on the budget and the proposed property tax rate of 18 mils.
Okay, so we are having our public hearing to consider that. Are there any other questions other than have been asked or from the audience about that? So in terms of the millage rate, it's not changing.
It's not changing.
That's the bottom line. And then we have, okay. All right, well, we'll close our public hearing then.
Okay.
If we have no comment.
Any final comments or questions?
You get enough caffeine, everyone?
I did have one tiny question.
Okay.
This is about, it has to do with qualified forest. We don't tax qualified.
I couldn't point to that's just part of the language. I don't know of any qualified forest lands around here. Maybe in northern Michigan.
Is that forest land that earns income then?
Honestly, I honestly don't know.
I just can't believe you wouldn't know the answer to that.
I can find out, but I mean, it's a classification of property. I just don't think there's a lot of it.
Okay.
I know when I looked at any taxable value reports, that's never listed as any of the property in our district.
Okay. That's fine. Thank you.
All right.
Well, I know you've been pulling your hair out over this, but you still got a good head of hair, and thank you.
Mostly gray.
Yeah, but thank you for plowing through all that. It does seem unnecessarily complicated, and you have to be like Karnak the Magnificent here to come up with.
Patience and good questions.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
All right, we'll come back to some of these things become relevant in board action later. Steve is not going to leave. Okay. Well, we had the opportunity of Pathways graduation, which almost all of us were able to attend, and it's always a great event. And so you want to give us an update, Kelly?
Yeah. I brought some friends with me. Gail, we might need you.
I mean, should have paid attention which one I unplugged. Try.
My eyes finally stopped twitching.
Oh, man.
Thank you. What do we
we got 30 more minutes? That way you can. Perfect. My name's Kelly Luke, and I'm the principal of Pathways High School. Joining me tonight is Shannon Hillard. She's the admin assistant for a little bit longer, and then we're going to lose her to Toby, but we're very excited for her. And then Kristen Hussink, who is ESI, for our school. She's a teacher, she's a coach, she's all the things. So brought them with us. Thank you to the board and Keeban and Gail for joining us for our graduation the other night. We're coming in, we let Steve handle the numbers. We're coming in with some heart for you tonight. So, yeah. Okay, if you were to look up Vicksburg Pathways or call us for information, these are some of the things you're going to get. Answers to some questions. We're open 32 hours a week. We have online courses. We give kids a computer. They come in. They work with teachers in the lab. But there's minimal requirements for students. So they have to be there at least 6 hours in person. They have to complete at least 6 modules or assignments each week. Now, that keeps you out of the doghouse. That does not move you ahead at the right pace towards your diploma, but it's showing you're engaged, and it's showing you're doing some work, and it's moving kids in the right direction to start. We also have 2 diploma options, a 24-credit diploma, which is the traditional high school diploma. We have a 20-credit diploma, which takes off 8 elective classes, so it's for students who maybe are getting a little older, maybe want to go to trade school or a school like Valley or Western next. That's a decent diploma above a GED, and it meets the requirements for a Michigan Merit Curriculum diploma. So, all right. It's a climb. If you've come from the parking lot or down in the basement up to Pathways, you know it takes some effort. It's not for the faint of heart. We think this is kind of symbolic of students on their way to getting their high school diplomas. Some are starting towards the top level. The end is in sight, and they are working their way a couple steps at a time, a couple steps to go, and they're going to get that diploma. We have others, not so close. They have a few extra flights to go maybe, or are starting behind or starting not as far up. Then we have some that are barely in the building when they get to us. They don't know where the doors are. They don't know how to get up the next flight. But it's just going to take them a lot more effort. We really don't care where you're at when you get to us. We want to work with you to get you to the next step. Sometimes it's encouraging you to get there. Sometimes it's pushing you to get there, pulling you to get there. But we want you to make progress. We want you to keep going towards your goal, whatever that might be. Why Pathways? When we have kids apply, we ask them lots of questions. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What worked for you in your other school? What didn't work? These are some questions that current students and current graduates answered when they interviewed. Why do I need something like this? I heard at the retirement reception, we heard a lot of mornings. I don't like mornings. High school students, a lot of them don't like mornings. They have to go to work. They have problems with peer relationships. I'm going to try not to be emotional, but too much drama. They need flexibility. Whole bunch of reasons that people come to Pathways.
So alternative, we're alternative for a reason. We celebrate that we're alternative, that we're different. That's a cornerstone for us. So when Kelly says we do an interview, it's interviewing the students, why would they be a good fit for us, and what can we bring to them that they haven't already had an experience with. So when Kelly says that these are the responses that students give to us during the interview. So this is offering them a different alternative, an alternative to the non-traditional setting which they've had experience in, the brick and mortar traditional school. Nothing against what they have going on, but there's a demographic that we fill. So that's where all that is coming from.
Some of the barriers we try to remove for the students, I every week go to Generous Hands, get power packs for the kids, bring them right to the school so they don't have to go there, because a lot of them don't have their own transportation or have very limited transportation. We offer gas cards, especially if they're not in our district, we want them to get here. We have kids that have moved out, so this helps them still come to our school to finish out because they have built that relationship with us here at Pathways. Food, we get work with food service every day. I order lunches from the high school. They're so generous to make them and bring them, our custodian brings them over to us, or I go get them. So our kids still feel like they're part of being in a school setting, and they still feel they're getting food, which they need to keep moving. Clothing, we have donations dropped off from different periods. Parents, kids, past students have come in with donations. Some of our kids need a sweatshirt, need a pair of pants. Come in, they don't really have a lot. Student Senate at the high school last year bought us a whole bunch of hats, mittens, gloves, best thing for our students. We appreciate that. And then we did a giving tree here, and the staff and a lot of teachers in the district donated things. Laundry detergent is the #1 thing our kids ask for. They have to do laundry. We get cards for the laundromat from Generous Hands. They help out with that. So kids can go do a load of laundry, come up, do their schoolwork, go home, get their nice clean clothes for the next day for them. And then when we have students that have children, we have a bouncer seat, we have a pack and play, we have the changing table, we have a stroller even. I physically have sat with a child and played with them. We all kind of take turns when the baby comes up, but we help mothers with that too. Just any barriers we can help the kids with, we try to remove those so they can get their education.
Gas cards, we're trying to get kids hooked up with the buses that are already going around the district. Next year, we're going to change our hours to more align with the high school hours, so when kids are getting dropped off at 7:15, we're about ready to open, so by the time they get here, they'll be open. Or just get a ride there and take a bus home. We also have some vans that we take a school van out on Wednesdays, and we have volunteers in the community, shout out to our volunteers, who come and pick up our kids and then bring them back if they live outside of the Vicksburg bus routes. If we hear of a need of a kid or if a staff person comes up, I know about a need for a kid, we're going to try to make it happen. We're going to try to meet the need. These are some things we know that online education's not the greatest. We have a lot of kids that need to get up and move in and do some hands-on activities. So we're trying to be creative, trying to bring some other things. 2 Pathways, our staff have been teaching some in-person classes. With the Innovation Grant, we got a 3D printer. We've had a 3D printing class. We've had a coding class. We've contracted with EFA and actually have some teaching artists that come into our building. They know it's hard to get our kids there or get them organized at a certain time, but they come in and provide classes for our kids there or here at Pathways. So we've used the basement, we've used the classroom, we've used in-house, wherever we need to be, we're going to make it work. But we've had some jewelry making classes, a 2D printing class, a dance and movement class, and recently a nature art class that we've been able to provide with EFA's help. Our students can also sign up for the CTE classes or EFA classes online, or I'm sorry, off campus, not online. We have some kids that take classes at Valley, and also one early middle college student this year.
Celebrations. Everything that we've talked about to me is a celebration. The fact that these kids are not a statistic, they get identified in the I'm behind in math and reading. So we know that in elementary school, when they're identified as below grade level, that gap for them continues to widen. Even though their skills may continue to grow, we have students that approach us for high school and they're not reading anywhere near their grade level. They're behind. How do we meet their needs, right? These are not students who are dropouts. We have students who are below the poverty level. We call them couch surfers. They do not have a permanent residence. Their own parents they argue or whatever, have a fallout, and they are not in their home. So they are living with friends, they're living with us, they're living with volunteers. We so passionately believe in all means all. Every student should have an opportunity, and if they're willing to work, we're right there with you. It is not like Carcel, my gosh, I look at these faces, I'm like, oh, Cheyenne's one of our newest ones to come this year, and if you could just hear these stories and just celebrate them all, right? So just then the fact that they're here, that they're attending school is a celebration. We give them birthday cards, every kid. You know, when you're in elementary school, parents are gonna come in and they bring cupcakes or, whatever, my kid, food allergies, so we cut up watermelon. Woo. So we celebrate the kids' birthdays. Shannon has, what you bring to the table, I just celebrate you and what you've done for our kids. Just for walking in the door, Shannon's the mom of our program, and I think that needs to be in wherever Lord has this. Like, put that in the job description. Because you have to parent these kids, and it will, honey, nope, I don't like you, get back in there. So, modules completed, our assignments completed, Shannon celebrates that with them, as do all of us. Students are on academic probation, that is, no, we don't want to focus on the negative, it's positive reinforcement, but these are students who need boundaries, and they need to know that you're going to hold the line. So when you get the letter for, where like the high school, middle school, you've missed so many days of school, you're at risk for missing credit. Okay, they're gonna toe the line with Mr. Brush. Like, really watch how many more I can get before you actually have to call me in. No, we're like, you're on academic probation. Like, right now, let's go. Your assignments don't decrease, they increase. Your hours, they increase. So you have to work even harder once you're on probation. They need skin in the game. We hold them to that. We celebrate when they move up a grade level. So when students come to Pathways, their grade level is determined by how many credits they've earned. So a student may say, I'm an 11th grade student. Sweet pea, you have 9 credits. You're a 10th grader, baby. Like, you're just starting out. So let's earn that credit, and we'll celebrate you moving through that system. Kids are their own speed clock. They're their own limit. So if they want to work faster and get stuff done, we do not hold them to quarter markings and the time frame of everybody else in a traditional school. They can work as much as they want. So we celebrate that when they promote the grades. Count days are a big deal for us. We want them to show up in person, showing up to school physically. Like, yes, we're technically an online school, but we celebrate that FaceTime. I think, Shannon, you're such a big part of that. When they walk up those stairs, while they're catching their breath, she fills that gap while they're talking, having an asthma attack. But no, it's, hey, I'm so glad to see you. Oh, look, you're early today. I wasn't sure we were going to see you. We celebrate them, and I feel like the kids look forward to that. When you're not sitting at the desk, they're like, where's Shannon? Did you order my lunch? Do you have my lunch got ordered? What if food service changes the menu? Right? Like, I'm ready, I go back. We celebrate our kids when they're employed, and no, that's not the goal of every high school student, but some of these students are breadwinners for their family. Our students, their families rely on their income to support the family, to keep the lights on. We've had several students who their heat and their water have been shut off. They're going to come here to us, like, to wash their clothes. How many kids, you don't know why they have so many absences. They don't have clean clothes, and they are embarrassed about that. Shannon does a phenomenal job working with our community and bringing in toothbrushes, toothpaste, deodorant, and we're like, hey, babes, you need to use that, all right? Like, we're going to wash up. This soap, you got to get wet first, right? This is how we do that. So it is things because they haven't been parented at home. That might not be a cornerstone family value in the homes that they're from. And I'm looking at it, like, I'm preaching to the choir because elementary, right on pre-K through the high school gets this. We don't allow Axe, drop body spray. For our own safety. That's it. No, not the spray, not the aerosol. So what these students are holding are the Student of the Week. One thing I think Kelly downplays the importance that she has in the rally that she has created with our staff. I have never worked I'm coming into my 26th year of education working in the school system. I've worked at Star Commonwealth, I've worked at Loy Norix, I'm from the east side, went to Pontiac schools. Inner city, when the kids talk about being in the hood and living in a city, you don't have a clue, but okay. You would go, like, that's not, whatever. So, these kids, Students of the Week, we celebrate them as a staff meeting. Kelly pulls us all together every single week. There are no misses. We are in the room together, good, bad, or indifferent. We are all in the room together having that conversation. Our entire roster of students, their names get spoken aloud every single week, multiple times a week, as a staff together, every single student. you maintain that and you force that back around the table where a kid, if we haven't seen them, it's not, we haven't seen them. What's your update on this student? Who else have you reached out to? It's not just emergency contacts, it's their boyfriend or girlfriend, it's their neighbor, it's their grandparent, it's whoever we know. Hey, do you know this kid? Send them a message. We're looking for them. Those kids know we're hunting them down. And that's Kelly putting that, I don't want to say pressure, but just reminding us, yes, we can get bogged down in the weeds of planning our lessons and what are we going to do with the kids in here and sending a report that for this and counting up the weekly whatevers. And it's Kelly is very person first and make sure that our kids, we celebrate the presence of our kids and know when they're not in school or they don't email us or text us back, they know we're looking for them. They know because we communicate and we speak their name out loud every week. What is their progress? What have they done? And then we say, this kid hasn't been to school in 3 years. They showed up 3 times this month. We're celebrating that, right? Like that might not seem like a big deal, like 3 times out of a month. This kid hasn't been in school for 3 years. How did they get to this age not being in education? So we celebrate that, and Kelly does a phenomenal job of making sure that not only do these kids get recognized, but they're Facebook famous. So, I know I went over my allotted 2 minutes that I got to talk, but there's so many to celebrate, and then.
And I just want to say, when we hand that kid a Student of the Week certificate, some of these kids have never been Student of the Week, so the shock on their face is beautiful.
Me several times.
It's going on the fridge. I've had parents email me saying, when's he gonna be in the newsletter? He got the certificate, when is this coming out? I mean, it's a beautiful thing.
Celebrating these moments, one thing that the kids get to do, and whether they like it or not, we make them celebrate their diploma by ringing this bell. There's a little mantra that they have to say out loud. We as our mentor teachers, so every student is partnered with a homeroom or a mentor teacher. That's the teacher that is making that contact with the kid every week and with their family. But then we get to say some nice things and embarrass them or roast them in public, which all of them, it's their love language. I mean, it's a beautiful thing. If you haven't been able to see one of those, I definitely I feel like it's Pablo, like when the bell rings and you guys who are downstairs can speak to that. Like you hear that bell and like, oh, I gotta get up there, I gotta go pathways, celebrate that kid. So here's, I'm looking again at each one of these stories. That tough kid that was always talking smack, yeah, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do that, and Shannon's like, you told me that before. Let's, where's the, show me, put your money where your mouth is. And then that's the kid who couldn't hold his tears back the entire graduation, and he's the first of his siblings to graduate, and his older sister, anyway, just beautiful thing. So
When he walked out of lab for the last time, he rang the bell, he just kept hugging staff. He just went, another hug, another hug, another hug.
he's not a hugger.
And
He's not a hugger.
I said,
My
we,
favorite graduation. It's just so sweet to watch.
as he was walking away, and we're kind of pushing him down the stairs, like, no, really, stop, you gotta get back to work and all that. But I said, will you please tell me how much this school sucks one last time? Like, will you?
Raise your voice
Because
when
by
you
the
do it.
time we got to that point, we had heard it over and over and over. Your rules
you
and
keep
your
changing the
phone
rules?
and I can't have my phone and so we love that guy, and that was a big deal.
Yeah.
On May 7th, we had our 300th graduate. You might recognize Ellie's face. She also was an outstanding senior for the vet science program, nominated by Dr. Heikes. Yeah, she's definitely another success story for us. As of June 9th, today, 311 graduates and counting. About 4 or 5 more that are hoping to finish before summer school's over on July 2nd. And then got a new group. So this is this year. These are pictures at our graduation from this year. This is our why. This is our why are we here. In this group, there are 3 parents. There are kids that have been hospitalized. There are kids that have been in foster care. There are kids that are going to be going off to KVCC or Glen Oaks, MSU, the Navy.
Yep, the Navy.
Pretty soon, they keep texting us like, can we see his diploma? We want to take him early. But We have one student that was the first in her family to ever earn a diploma and ever hold one in her hands.
It's 2025, and we, like, really? Parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles. She's got a
She's the
diploma.
first one.
She's got a diploma.
She's the first one.
And that wouldn't be without us.
So this is Vicksburg Pathway. Thank you.
Kelly, can I ask a question or two? What level do these kids generally come in at, like ninth grade, 10th grade, number of credits, and how long do you have them? Are some of these kids blowing through 3 years of credits in 2 years or a year and a half? Are some kids taking 5 years to do 4 years? What
Yeah.
kind of happens?
We have, I mean, handful of 17-year-olds that come in with 3 to 5 credits. So they're 2 years behind when they get to us. Students need to be still 19 on count day, so that's kind of the limit for us. They can be 19 on count day and then turn 20 after count, but then we can't enroll them the next year. So that's kind of the deadline for how long they can be with us. So we don't care if it takes you 5 years, it takes you 6 years, maybe it takes you 3.5 years, but we just want to keep you moving. Ninth graders, we don't have as many ninth grades come in fresh as in, 0 credits coming in, starting. So it's more, they've been at some other places and either falling behind or just need a different way.
Okay. Do you go through the summer?
We go till July 2nd, so 4 weeks, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday from 8 to 2. So
Yeah.
we're open.
I guess the other thing I just wanted to point out, that this is where I think we can say a lot of good things about our community. I have a connection with Generous Hands, and they are just, they want to help any way they can. And giving, the laundry, kids can put a load of laundry in and come down and work in the lab and then pick up their clothes after, and providing food. And then I have a neighbor who's one of your drivers, and to have a community that says, you're doing some good thing, what do you need? And we see that in our community all the time. And it's a wonderful
You had
thing.
one downstairs tonight. That you introduced me to someone.
Yeah, right.
Wants
Yeah.
to provide some interviewing skills.
Right, yeah, so
for our
I got
students.
to that networking. All right, well, any other questions for?
Yeah, just kudos to you guys. I've had the privilege of being at 2 of the Pathways graduations, and it's amazing. So just thank you, and thank you. Thank you for your passion. I mean, you're a pretty passionate person, so. Do you guys see an uptick with, obviously, COVID, mental health, a lot is still happening from that? I mean, are you seeing kind of more students reach out for Pathways? Are you seeing just an increase or a trend, or?
It's always interesting because this last year we had 60 students start in the fall. We've graduated 37 this year, so we're expecting another 60 to come in, for this next school year. But it's so hard to know.
Local districts have caught on to what we're doing, so where we didn't have, say, competition, so to speak, there was Go Lake and then the Way program.
Okay.
And Schoolcraft now has linked learning, so other districts are kind of trying to do what we're doing because of the success that they've heard of our program. So we don't have as many students from out of the Vicksburg district coming in. We used to have about 1/4 of our enrollment when we first started Steve Freiling and the Way program. It was maybe 1/4, maybe 1/3 possibly, but that was it. All the rest was outside of the Vicksburg school district. And so uptick, I think we have more Vicksburg students than we've ever had historically, where we have fewer from the outside of the district. So that really doesn't help Steve with his numbers because it's the same.
One or the other high school.
Right.
But the important thing is that those kids are still getting services and all that, but, yeah.
It's not new money to our district for school choice.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
So Kelly, is Pathway similar to Phoenix
Not any,
in
no.
KPS? How is it?
Our credit's legitimate. Students have to do the work, and if they're not doing the work, they don't get the credit for it. And-
But it's a similar population
Well, we have,
as who would go to Phoenix in
so we
KPS?
have a population like any high school. So we have students who have like teen pregnancy. We have students who have experience with drugs and alcohol abuse. We have students on probation, just like any high school does, mental health concerns. So our population, I wouldn't say is more than what the traditional high school is. We just have about 100 kids at any given time. We enroll more than 100 per year, but through graduation and whatnot,
Yeah,
no. So I wouldn't say we have more students with those, because I've worked at Phoenix. Where our students are not like the students have you been to Phoenix?
well, my kids graduated from KPS, so I
But
was,
have you been to Phoenix?
no.
So there is no comparison.
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't sure how they all fell into place and who was doing what, but I have a friend, her daughter, who was a smart girl, but was getting bullied in school here. And this was probably 4 or 5 years ago, but she ended up going to Pathways, and I thought, why are you going? I mean, when I heard she went there, I'm like, why would you go there? You are an intelligent, very bright girl, but she couldn't deal with the drama. So she did great. She graduated, and she's a cosmetologist and doing her thing.
We had
So-
students from Pathway or from Portage on the IB track, and they burned out. So it was too much, and there's a quicker way to attain credit.
We haven't told the kids.
Yeah, so I,
Some of them just don't know.
Yeah,
They see
yeah.
it, be reminded of that.
you would get that from what I had said, and I guess I didn't highlight the other side of the celebration with those students who want to graduate early. I think, I can't remember which one, maybe it was Dave, Dr. Schremer, that said, can you graduate early? Students can graduate early, and we have several that have, because they're not, high school's not for them.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
need to get out and get into the workforce
Yeah.
or move on to college. We have graduates at U of M, Grand Valley, Notre Dame, Western, I mean, it's not just, a certain demographic. So
Yeah.
I apologize for giving that impression, but we do have other students who, their SAT scores are high too. If we have, like over 1,200, and we still have students that meet that
Yeah.
demographic.
Yeah.
We do.
And then how do you pay, like, who pays for the gas cards? Are they donated as well? Or do you get fund money? Do they get fund money to do certain things?
McKinley Pinto is some of them.
Yeah, we buy 'em.
donations from other, like Generous Hands gives us a stack. And when I say stack, there's never the same amount. And then there are ones that we purchase.
Okay.
But
We
don't
put
have
some in our
textbooks.
summer
Yeah.
budget, because we want kids to get out of school.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. I was just curious how that got funded. Okay. Thank you for all you do. It's awesome.
Thank you.
All right. That was wonderful. Our next agenda item is for public comment. Meetings of the board are open to the public. It's the time the board conducts the business of governing the school system in the public arena. This is not intended as a meeting with the public with ongoing dialogue. Staff may follow up with you regarding issues raised during comment time. Please exercise decorum and respect laws regarding privacy and defamation. And speakers are limited to 3 minutes. We only have one person who signed up tonight. And is there a microphone? Yeah, they'll use the microphone over there. So Michelle O'Neill, did you want to address the board? One of the things I'm going to make a practice of doing just is, Tamara's going to be the timing so that I can pay attention. She'll tap it once when you get 15 seconds
Okay.
to know, and then she'll tap it twice when your 3 minutes is up.
Okay, I just wanted to address the issue regarding the book banning or the taking books out of the library. I thought that an alternative viewpoint was warranted. To me, book banning has never been a good idea, and that's not my opinion historically. The people that wanted to ban books for one reason or another have always been authoritarians and fascists, and that's just historically fact. I applaud parents who are involved in their kids' education and who say, this book is not for my child. 1,000% I support them. but I don't want them to take that book out of the library in case my child wants to read it, or my grandchild. As I have a 5-year-old grandchild who announced the other night, I'm going to kindergarten. Very proud of that. And so down the line, I want the books available to him. And the thing I kept coming back to was that we all have the same rights, but we also have the same responsibilities. And it's my responsibility to protect your rights as much as my own. And I want to ask that other people look at it that way too, and you protect my rights as much as you want to protect your own. And I abhor violence. And if I had a choice, there would be no violent video games, ever, anywhere. But there are. Now, would I choose them for my grandchild? No. But I'm not going to tell somebody else their grandchild can't play with them, whether it's a book or a video game. I'm assuming that in our library there are lots of books that talk about violence. And yet, I'm not going to ask you to take them out of the library. I'm not a religious person. And I'm sure there are lots of books in the library that have religious passages. I'm not going to ask you to take them out of the library. So I just thought that that viewpoint should be represented, that we need to be responsible to each other and for each other and with each other and treat each other the way we want to be treated. And if you don't want a book taken out of the library that you love, please don't take a book out of the library that I might love. Thank you.
I didn't get to use it.
You think that she wanted to use the gavel, and you were too brief.
Keep talking, so she
We need to move on to board action required. 4A is approval of the following board minutes. We have May 12, 2 meetings on May 12 where we had to have 2 meetings for the ISD election. Are there a motion to approve those?
So moved.
So Tina?
Support.
Stephanie, okay. Are there any additions or corrections before we vote? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. 4B is approval to accept student enrollments through Section 105, and I believe we're supposed to add Section 105C as well. Is that correct, Kevin?
Yeah, what you're going to see also in the, what's in the agenda is the press release, which is basically letting the public know that we are accepting students out of district as well as out of county, which is the 105C designation. But Section 105 covers both 105, 105C.
Okay.
And this is standard.
Okay. And that allows students from out of district, and we've traditionally had a net gain with that. Okay, so I'll entertain a motion for that.
So moved.
Moved by Lisa. Support. Supported by Ron. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, we have approval to amend the 24-25 budgets and adopt the appropriations resolution for the 25-26 budgets for the following funds: general funds, special revenue fund, debt retirement funds, and the building and site funds for 2020, 2022, and 2024.
So moved.
Moved by Tina and support by Stephanie. Steve spent quite a while. I'm glad you're on it, sorry. I'm glad you're on it. So this is a roll call vote. Stephanie?
Yes.
Dan's not here. Lisa?
Yes.
Tina?
Yes.
Ron?
Yes.
Rick?
Yes.
And yes. 4D, approval of proposed property tax millage rate for 2025-26. And as Steve reported, that would be no change. Any questions before we go to vote? Comments? Okay. Stephanie?
Yes.
Lisa?
Yes.
Tina?
We never moved on that.
Oh, we didn't? Oh, gosh.
So moved.
Thank you, Lisa.
Support.
Support, thank you, Lisa and Rick. All right, I need to be retrained every month. Okay, Stephanie?
Yes.
Lisa?
Yes.
Tina?
Yes.
Ron?
Yes.
Rick?
Yes.
And yes. Approval, 4E, approval to renew membership for the high school and middle school in the Michigan High School Athletic Association from August 1, 2025 through July 31, 2026.
So moved.
Moved by Tina.
Support.
Support by Rick. Any comment, question? Okay. Stephanie?
Yes.
Lisa?
Yes.
Tina?
Yes.
Ron?
Yes.
Rick?
Yes.
And yes. Item 4F, approval of the Stratford field trip.
So moved.
Moved by Lisa.
Support.
Support by Ron. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. We have second reading of the following policies, and Keelan, did you want to clarify,
Just real quick, if you clicked on 4430,
which is the first one?
yep, the leave of absence, there's a blank there. And in that blank, it should read by the ESTA, which is the Earned Sick Time Act. Thank you.
Yeah.
So someone can make a motion to amend the policy now on the second reading and support it and then vote it, and then we can add it in without having to bring this to another reading if the board so chooses.
Okay, so moved.
Support.
Tina and Stephanie? Okay. And do we need to do a roll call for that amendment? Or can we?
I would.
Okay.
Yes.
Stephanie, yes.
Yes.
Lisa, yes. Tina?
Yes.
And
Yes.
And Rick? And yes, okay, so that amendment is passed. And then this is the second reading of the policies, and with the board's permission, with that amended policy, we can do G1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, if you're all okay with that, and we'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Moved by Rick,
Support.
support by Lisa. Stephanie?
Yes.
Lisa?
Yes.
Tina?
Yes.
Ron?
Yes.
Rick?
Yes.
And yes, and with that, we have completed our business.